the announcement of the new snap lockdown that's happening in Melbourne or Victoria at the moment with the 5 days stage 4 restrictions made me think of something we discussed only a little while back. I think probably in the first episode of the year, where we were saying all these people that thought that it's all over, we got it behind us in 2020. Let's go back to normal. And now this is just a classic example of, in the environment that we're in, if you're not used to the idea that the governments are going to snap us back into lockdown whenever a flare up happens, get used to it because it will.
That's right, Ben. And the situation or scenario that you're sort of outlining there will probably happen all the way to the end of the year.
Absolutely. I mean, we're dealing with unusual circumstances, but I think it's an example of remember that we're still dealing with it, and these things are going to happen. I'm not, and again, I said this at the beginning of the year too, I'm not particularly sympathetic towards people that get upset if they get caught out because they've been traveling or whatever. I've made the conscious decision that I'm not going anywhere until this is well and truly. I mean, I went to Adelaide over Christmas, but I did it in a different way. I did it by car, and I had it's 4 hours on either side of the border, I think, between Adelaide and Melbourne. So if news broke that a border was going down, I could always just turn back, and it would have been fine.
I agree. And that's a really good sort of way to plan if you do need to travel interstate, Ben. But there's a lot of discussion about it. But with state border closures and the policies, the individual state policies around closures, I really don't know why anyone would trust the national call to go holidaying in other states of Australia other than your own.
Exactly. One other thing that I saw that just to mention quickly too is that some of the reporting this morning was that people are getting apoplectic about the fact that the actual lockdown directions are actually for 2 weeks. They're not for 5 days. And presumably that's because, it was announced for 5 days, but presumably that's in the event they need to go for longer, and perhaps they wanted to secure the time frame ahead of time in case they need to announce next, I guess, on the Wednesday that they have to keep going. But it's an excellent example of, just stay where you are. I'm sure you can enjoy yourself where you're living and all that sort of thing.
It's a tricky one. Just on that, as somebody outside the state of Victoria, it's very inconvenient and it can be very frustrating. But the reality is that the course that we have taken as a nation will now rely on us being vaccinated, and that's not going to happen till the end of this year. So, even if other governments or any government in Australia, state or federal, promises you a wonderful time somewhere other than the state you live, if you decide to accept that advice to go as a tourist, it's up to you whether or not you believe that they're actually going to honour your ability to travel freely within the country.
Absolutely. Well, let's we'll stay on this, but we'll introduce the whole topic of variants as well, because obviously what caused this snap lockdown, and I should say was also the cause of the one in Perth about a month. Was it a month or so ago? I think. Was this idea that the UK variant had escaped from hotel quarantine, so they had to take more decisive action to supposedly clamp down on what was happening. And obviously, Perth only had the one case, and then nothing really ended up happening from that. Whereas Melbourne's a little bit more concerning in that there are more cases associated with the initial infection. With this discussion of the variants, etc., obviously we've got you've got a UK version, a South African version, the Brazilian version. They're obviously slightly different, but the broad narrative is that they're more transmissible, up to whatever it is, 70% or whatever it is. At least that's what they were saying for the UK one, and that's what was the cause for the alarm. Did you have any thoughts on that? I mean, it sounds like my take from it in terms of the media reporting, and that is it's sort of designed to be a scarier sort of approach. in terms of that?
I guess it's a numbers game, so we shouldn't dismiss these more transmissible variants, because when numbers are high, the difference in transmission is significant. So if you're in a situation like in Europe, parts of America, parts of South America now, or even parts of Asia and Africa, a highly transmissible variant, if you've got large numbers of infections, is a big concern because it translates into large numbers of extra infections.
Mm.
In Australia's case, I think you'd have to say that the numbers of infections are so low that if you add, 10, 20, 30, even 50% increased contagion to it, it's not actually a big deal. That being said, if you get numbers of over 1,000, then that would be probably of more concern. But I think in the Australian situation, where we're so, alert and react so strongly to such low numbers, I don't actually think it's much of a concern at all, to be honest, any more than we are concerned about corona. So I think from an Australian perspective, there's no need to be much or any more concerned about COVID than we already are.
Yeah. I guess before we move on from this topic, there was one other thing that I wanted to talk about, which was hotel quarantine itself. Obviously, there was a drumbeat for the last couple of months, starting from at the state government level, some state governments anyway, that there should be changes to the system with more federal involvement. The idea of not having it inside hotels that are in, CBD locations, and etc. And obviously, these last couple of examples, I guess Melbourne is probably the biggest one, is the idea of should it actually be located in those hotels, and should it just be like a facility out in the middle of nowhere that has no contact with anyone, in order to prevent this sort of thing from happening?
This is where also I'm a little bit perplexed about the approach that's been taken in Australia. I think the one thing that we know about COVID is that its spread is really dependent on population density. And I'm sure in the years to come, there'll be plenty of dissection of this and every nation's experience. Given that, the Australian experience has been to jam people with COVID all into the same hotel, or return travellers all into the same hotel, where somebody with COVID is sharing the air conditioning with someone else. Look, I can't pass comment on that, but I would have thought the reality is that if you spread people out, and I saw this week an article suggesting that actually caravan parks were the best place for
nice open
quarantine.
air.
I don't know if they meant in tents or what, but I think that's basically the case. If you took people, and this is why I think probably in-home quarantine is a much better solution than hotel-based quarantine as well. We'll need somebody to write a report and really analyse this, but I think we do know that population density is a big factor. So by moving people out of hotels, you probably would reduce the risk of transference amongst hotel guests or quarantine guests and the services that are supporting them in their quarantine.